Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Droids Are Welcome Here, the Star Wars podcast, where we just talk about the passions that bring us all together. Our first guest here, Max Smith, is someone that you'll probably, if you don't know him, you know his works, because he's got a pretty extensive list of credits. I could probably spend the next hour just going over that entire list. I'm joined today by my lovely co-host, Jace.
Hi.
Mac, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It's our pleasure. So, you are a sound effects supervisor at Skywalker Sound, correct?
That's correct.
So how did you get there? Is this something that you wanted to do sound design from when you were young, or did it just kind of transition this way?
I always knew that I wanted to work on movies. There was a little movie called Star Wars that came out when I was three years old, and it kind of rearranged my chromosomes and kind of took over my life. And my mom fueled my interest with the toys and all that stuff. So I kind of lived and breathed Star Wars for many years in my childhood. And I knew I wanted to be involved with movies, but I really didn't know what aspect of it until I got into college, when I got more into working at the college radio station and learning about some basic audio production. And then something just clicked. It was like, oh, people must be doing this for movies. I knew there was good sound in movies, but it never sort of dawned on me that that could be a career. And then I just went down the rabbit hole to learn as much as I could, and ended up being in the right place at the right time, and met sound designer named Randy Tom, who his first film sound credit was Apocalypse Now. And then he ended up meeting Ben Burt and got hired to do a bunch of sound effects field recording for Empire Strikes Back. So Randy has been part of Skywalker Sound for over 40 years, I believe. So I interned for him on a little movie called Castaway with Tom Hanks, and I've been here ever since. So it's been about 24 years that I've called Skywalker Sound my home, and I work 95% of the time at the ranch.
Okay, that is definitely one heck of a journey. That's a long process.
So first things first, who exactly are you? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, from a family of tuba players.
I like that.
My dad played tuba in college back in the late 40s, early 50s, and my older brother and sister played tuba as well. So there was always music in the house, and love for movies, and I would go see movies as often as I could. I don't know what age it was, but I'm sure I was younger than most people would imagine. But my parents would drop me off at the movie theater on Friday night because I'd want to see, Back to the Future or Ghostbusters or whatever was the new exciting thing in the 80s. And if I really loved it, I would beg them to go with me to see it again the following day. So I just devoured movies as much as I could. We were early adopters to the Laserdisc format, and so we had a big Laserdisc collection and VHS tapes and all that. And yeah, just loved movies. And then I went to the University of Iowa in Iowa City, and then I ended up moving to California in 1999.
Do you have a favorite movie?
I do. My favorite movie is Raiders of the Lost Ark.
An excellent choice.
Very good choice. So it's safe to say then that movies have been a pretty major part of your life, literally since childhood, and they were a huge influence on the direction that your career took. But other than Star Wars, what other movies really influenced you in your formative years?
That's a good question. I got exposed to a lot of stuff. Having much older siblings, I got exposed to things that I probably shouldn't have at that age. Seeing Monty Python and the Holy Grail and American Werewolf in London and Blues Brothers and Animal House and things like that. So
You gotta look on the bright side of life.
exactly.
I
So
love
yeah,
Monty Python.
oh totally. And just so a lot of comedies, a lot of things with special effects. And then when I was in high school, I got sort of sucked into the David Lynch universe a bit, and I watched almost every episode of Twin Peaks when it first aired with my parents. We like shared all that together, and then yeah, just started exploring more sort of odd and strange, more art house stuff.
I salute your dedication to Twin Peaks. That is impressive.
That's still on my list, and I presume that is now on our list, Jace.
Yes, it is.
As a supervising sound editor, what kind of things do you work on? What would your typical kind of day-to-day be? I imagine it probably varies project to project.
Yeah, absolutely. A supervising sound editor, I like to think of it as kind of like the sound producer of a project. I'm really not involved while they're shooting a project or it's in, production for animation. I get involved quite later in the game, but I'm usually the first one that's on the project as far as post goes for sound, and I'm usually the last one involved. So not only am I responsible for getting a clear idea from the client of what they are wanting from the soundtrack creatively, but I'm also in charge of helping keep on schedule. I hire my crew, staying on budget, and really just kind of overseeing the entire process from sound design to sound edit to mix to it being in a format that goes out the door and is married to picture, and that's what people experience. So it's a lot of fun. I love it. A lot of challenges because half the time I'm being more of a manager, and then the other half I get to really get in there and be creative. And being able to hire my team is really great. And every project has different challenges. Every client is different, so it keeps it really fresh. And hiring the team is almost like putting a band together. Like, we need dialogue editors who are cleaning up all the spoken material and what was shot on set or done in animation in a studio. Sound effects editors, Foley editors, assistants. And so I think of it like, finding, here's my guitar player, here's my bass player, here's my drummer, here's my keyboard player, here's my singer. And I have the people that I always go to first, but inevitably somebody's not available. So we end up putting someone new in the group, and it creates just a different dynamic. So yeah, it keeps it really interesting.
Is there anyone in particular that you maybe work with a little more than say someone else?
Well, I've luckily been able to keep a lot of my sound editing team together over the last few years. Some of them came from when we worked on the Marvel series Moon Knight, and we had such a great time, and everybody was just firing on all cylinders. So I sort of went out of my way to try to figure out what was happening next and give them plenty of notice to try to get them to stay on. And it wasn't the whole Moon Knight group, but a lot of them stayed on. We did She-Hulk and What If, those Marvel shows, and a lot of them came along with me to do this Netflix animated feature that we've wrapped up at the end of July, which won't be on Netflix until next year.
I'm very curious, how does someone design a sound? How does that process even begin to come to fruition?
It can take
Loaded
lots of
question, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It can take lots of different forms. It really, comes down to what the story needs for something. We're always trying to serve the story with sound to help put the audience in that place or help them get to the right emotion. So we're often going out and recording new material to have an arsenal of things to utilize and pull from, but it's not always an easy process, especially when it comes to something like a new creature or a fanciful character that needs to sound completely unique and different. oftentimes, we're just throwing paint at the wall and trying to figure out what sticks. And oftentimes the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth version isn't quite working. But there may be some element of that is working, and trying to, get in there and figure out what that is, and refocus the sounds. A lot of it is also getting feedback from not just the client, but also colleagues or people on your team, and see what they like about it and getting a fresh perspective. Some of it's very simple and some of it's not.
Interesting, interesting. And I think a lot of people don't really realize just how much actually goes in behind the scenes. It might be something you hear for 2 seconds, and it could take a week of work just to find that one perfect blend.
It's true.
So what would the difference be between doing something, say, animated versus live action? I would imagine that sound design itself is probably pretty much the exact same, but is there any real differences between it?
Yeah, I mean, there are differences, probably not as many as people might think. In a live action film, we're still fleshing out the track in a very a lot of layers, but we're trying to make it really feel like that what you're seeing, whether it's a street scene in New York or something on a farm. A lot of people think that, in live action especially, that what they're hearing there is what was picked up when the camera was rolling. And there's very little that you're hearing from what was happening when they were shooting a given scene. The production sound mixer, who's responsible for capturing sound on set, is trying to capture the cleanest dialogue. So they're trying to get, the cleanest recordings from the actors, and they're often not getting things like good footsteps or good environmental sounds, because their mic is very focused, and they're trying to really just capture the spoken word. So we're creating all these layers to put you in that space, and the same goes for animation, where animation, we often have a very clean slate because there's nothing recorded on set, but in animation, the picture department, the picture editor, and the director and stuff have been working on a cut for years, and they have been putting a lot of temp sounds into their track. So it's not completely a clean slate because they already have sort of a roadmap of what they're wanting to hear throughout things. And because they've been living with it for so long, they often get very attached to their temp sounds. So that can be a challenge working on animated films too.
Okay, interesting, interesting. And I'm going to use that to kind of transition a little bit into Star Wars, because for Star Wars, you've done, a lot. You've done live action, you've done animation, you've done shows, you've done movies. So what is it like to work within the Star Wars universe? I'd imagine that given how massive the universe is, and you've got now 40 plus years of sound to work with, what's it like?
Intimidating to some degree, because such a legacy has been crafted by Ben Burtt on the original films and the prequels, and he's such a genius when it comes to the things that he established for the universe. I oftentimes like to talk about, think about the power of sound design just from the aspect of the character R2-D2. If R2-D2 made just buzzes and whirs and harsh clicks, nobody would care about R2-D2. R2 is such a compelling and charismatic and interesting character because of the sounds, which took Ben over a year to nail down and become what they are today and what they were back in the original film. We have a giant sound library of a lot of the Star Wars stuff, so we definitely have a way to pull sounds from other things and help make it sound whatever the thing is, whether it's a specific ship that has been seen before, or a droid, or a lightsaber. But we're always trying to sort of inject new ideas and new things. And I got to work on Star Wars Visions Season 2, which is, really unique when it comes to Star Wars, because there's almost nothing that connects to any of the original films. It's often sort of its own corner of the Star Wars galaxy. So I felt like we did have a lot of freedom in those to bring a different aesthetic. Of course, you want lightsabers to sound like lightsabers and ATSCs to sound correct and blasts and things like that, but we could really get in there and do some different things with the environment and other aspects of it.
Out of that sound library, is there any particular sounds maybe that you took a little more inspiration from, or something that just kind of stuck with you as this is really cool, I like this?
Well, the first time I got access to that library was years ago on the Revenge of the Sith video game, and I think I spent just listening to original TIE fighter sounds in isolation and Chewbacca sounds, and I was just like, I think my jaw was on the ground. It was in there and hear the clean sort of original version of things. So yeah, there's lots of inspiration, and they're standing on the shoulders of giants when we're working on that stuff.
Revenge of the Sith, what was it like to do that? Because the sound work on that is part of why I love it so much. You can really get into the universe.
Well, I got to work on that game for almost 9 months, and I was mostly in charge of the little cinematic bits of it. Not as much of the gameplay sounds, but then also, I don't know if you remember, but there was something like 12 minutes of footage from the movie in the game, and LucasArts and Lucasfilm's plan was to release that game 2 weeks before the movie came out, to give people a glimpse of moments of the movie, I think, to try to boost sales. And so we actually had to finalize the sound on those scenes well before the sound crew had. And so I found myself knocking on Ben Burtt's door. I don't think I'd ever met him before, and I was very intimidated, but he was very cordial and invited me in, and I think he was in the middle of some other things, but I sat there quietly waiting to tell him what we were after. And I remember turning around and seeing behind me the lyrics to the Yub Nub song that were all like handwritten out, and I assume that was used, when they recorded the song. His room here at the ranch is like a museum. It's just got incredible artifacts from a lot of the things he's done over the years. But he did, talk to me and said, okay, well, I'm still working on the sounds for, X, Y, and Z. I haven't done those yet, but we can talk to so-and-so and we'll get you sort of a work in progress of as many scenes as we can. So it was definitely a challenge, and felt a lot of responsibility to try to get it to sound as good as we could in the limited amount of time that we had.
I think you guys definitely nailed that one. Like I said, that was one of my favorite games as a kid. I don't know how many times I played those levels, how many times I did the ultimate ending where you take over, and just it was pretty inspirational for a lot of people in the 90s.
There's one little funny thing that I don't really think made it to the final game, because I think I chickened out. But what's the name of the planet where Obi-Wan fights Grievous?
Utapau?
Yeah, Utapau. There was a cinematic in there where there's just a ton of battle droids fighting, and I can't remember who they're fighting, but laser blasts and things happening. And there was one battle droid sort of like mid-ground, a little bit in the back, but it was very sort of erratic in its animation. And then it got hit and falls over. And I put in a Wilhelm scream, but then put it through a ring modulator so it sounded droid-like, but the basis of the sound was a Wilhelm. And I thought it was hilarious, and I think I just chickened out and I turned it really far down, so it just got lost in the chaos. But it's in there, and we called it a droid helm.
Speaking of screams, who came up with R2's signature yell?
Well, that would be Ben Burt, because his voice is a key part of R2D2 because he used an ARP synthesizer, but he's also has a microphone hooked up to it, so he's sort of singing and vocalizing along with the synthesized sounds. So it's a marriage of his voice and the ARP. It's really cool.
So Revenge of the Sith, the video game, that's not the only kind of groundbreaking video game that you worked on to do with Star Wars. I saw that you also worked on Knights of the Old Republic 2, which that was kind of a giant in its own right. So what was the kind of the similarities between the two in terms of sound design?
That one I actually did some dialogue editing on, and it was only for a week or two. It was a pretty short stint, but they were kind enough to give me credit on that. So yeah, very different experience than Revenge of the Sith, but still had a great time.
What was it like doing like dialogue editing? How does that kind of compare?
It's very different. So it was essentially just taking, short lines, cleaning up little bumps and ticks and saving them out as, short sound files so they could, the game engine could trigger those when need be. Where Revenge of the Sith, I was actually working, more like it was a movie with the very short cinematics. I would get a QuickTime file and do all of the sound for those, whether it's characters running or droids or ships or lightsabers. So yeah, definitely apples and oranges.
I'm just looking through your kind of list of credits on the side here and like scrolling through it. You got Cars 2, you got Madagascar 3, you've got Despicable Me 2, How to Train Your Dragon 2, and then as I keep scrolling, I see Star Tours. That's something that obviously it's been very influential for a lot of generations. You got to step into the galaxy, as it were. So what was how was that?
That was really cool. I'm a huge Disney Parks fan, and so it was definitely a dream come true working on Star Tours. Again, it was a very short stint. I just helped out on the Jakku section where the Falcon's going through the Star Destroyer and all that stuff. So that was a blast. Just sort of refining and getting that to the finish line. So it's a lot of fun when I go to the parks and just happen to get that little segment, and I kind of smile to myself like, hey, I was involved with that.
I really liked Tron Legacy. I saw Legacy before I saw the original, so I didn't quite understand a lot of like their like callbacks. Like I just didn't get it first, but like had you like watched the original? Did you like the original and then got to work on Legacy?
Yeah, I was a huge fan of the original. I saw that, opening weekend in the theater and loved it. And I think we had either the VHS tape or the Laserdisc, and I would watch that all the time. It was just so groundbreaking back in the 80s, that visual style, the sounds, everything. So when that sequel, got on my radar, I found out, as fast as I could who was supervising that, who was going to be involved, and I begged and begged and begged to work on it.
You're just like,
And
I want this.
yeah, and it didn't look like I was going to be able to work on it, but the stars aligned, and I got to be one of the sound effects editors, which was incredible. The majority of the stuff I worked on was the real world stuff. So the real one, the first part, where Sam's not in the grid, but then I did help out on certain sections later in the movie, and one of the fun things that we did was the production required us to record Ducati motorcycles for Sam's motorbike that you see in the first part of the movie. We weren't allowed to put in other sounds of other bikes. So one of our assistant sound editors got in touch with the Ducati dealership down in San Rafael, and we arranged it one weekend for, I think he was one of the owners of the dealership, came up with a bike, and I think we spent probably 4 or 5 hours recording every possible speed and by and stop and away and approach, and putting microphones on the bike and having stationary microphones in other places around the ranch. And that was a blast doing all that. And then I actually took some of those sounds and ended up processing them with some weird effects. And some of those became some of the ships sort of in the near the end of the movie, where is it Sam and Clue and the guards are all sort of chasing in those ships. So some of that is some of those Ducati recordings that we did, which was a lot of fun. And then definitely the pinch me moment was, I think I had been off of the show because I had to leave early to go start working on Rango, which is another incredible project. But I got invited to one of the playbacks in our theater here at the ranch to kind of watch sort of a work in progress version of the mix. And Daft Punk was here, and they were sitting directly in front of me in the theater. And it was just very cool because I'd, again, been fans of theirs, since my college radio days. So really, really cool.
I love how it's just such a small galaxy, that people who work on one project are going to lead into another, and you just never really know who you're going to meet along the way.
It's true. And this building is pretty crazy because you will turn the corner and you never know who you're going to see. I've run into some pretty crazy people here at the ranch.
So I want to swing back a little bit to your very, very early years, and that's, you mentioned earlier, Castaway. For my generation, 90s kids, that was a pretty big deal. And I saw that was kind of like your first intern role. So I got to ask, what was that like? Tell me about that journey.
It was fun. It was my first introduction to working at the ranch, working with Randy Tom, who's an incredible sound designer. He won an Oscar for The Right Stuff and then later The Incredibles. But he invited me to come work with him. I think it was only 2 or 3 days a week, just for a few hours in the afternoon, just kind of get a taste of what he was doing. And my main job was to help find things to record that they needed. Because I don't know how aware you are of this, but they shot all the deserted island stuff in Fiji, and Robert Zemeckis really wanted it to sound incredibly lonely. He didn't want it to sound like a paradise, because then the audience might be like, oh, I wouldn't mind being on an island by myself. So that meant that like literally 98% of what you hear on that island is all done in post-production. We couldn't use the sounds of the island. First off, the surf was just so loud and pounding. It would just sounded like noise, and he didn't want the sound of any insects or birds or anything. So that really sort of ties the hands of the sound editors, because those are things we often go to. It's like, oh, we want to fill in the ambience with wildlife and all things. So we were really limited to the sounds of the ocean, the wind, things being affected in the wind, and Tom Hanks' character's Foley, him walking around, and things like fire. And one of my jobs was to try to find those big, giant coconuts, which are called young coconuts that have the big green husk. Try to find those at a local store so we could record those, because early on in that island sequence, Tom Hanks is trying to break into those to get something to eat. And I had the hardest time trying to find those specific coconuts. We thought it would be very easy to find them, but it ended up being really challenging. I went to various stores. I went to the wholesale produce market in San Francisco at like 5 a.m. when they got shipments in, and asked around. They're like, oh, no, we only get those like 2 or 3 times a year. And so Randy was like, well, just find some other things that we could record. And so I went to the grocery store and bought pretty much every shape and size of melon and squash and different things. And we went out behind the technical building here on the ranch, and we're tossing them against a rock wall and recording things. And then he was happy with what we got, and we ended up using some of it. And then weeks later, somebody from Hawaii sent those young coconuts. So we recorded those too, but he ended up liking the sound of the acorn squash more than the real thing. So that was a good lesson for me to learn that the real thing isn't always sound the best. You know, you're always experimenting and trying to make, sometimes you need to make things sound a little larger than life when they're on the big screen.
I never would have guessed that. Like, you know what? That wasn't even a coconut. It was just an acorn squash. This is the lore. This is the things I live for. You know, you never know what you're gonna learn.
But anyways, Mac, what advice would you have for those wanting to get into the industry?
Well, it's a challenging time right now, to be perfectly honest, because we're in a little bit of a lull, slowdown, for various reasons. I think part of it is the strikes last year, the writer's strike and the SAG strike, and then I think all the studios are starting to tighten their belts a bit. So it's a challenging time to get in, but it's definitely not impossible. Um, I'd say the most important thing is meeting people and being open to opportunity. So let's say, you really want to do sound design for a film. That's a great trajectory to aim for, but definitely don't limit yourself to just that. Meet people, try to learn about all kinds of aspects of filmmaking, not just audio, but other aspects of post-production, how things are shot on set. I think the more you understand about the entire process, the better you're going to be at your job. And that's not just sound. That's, let's say you want to get into costuming or hair and makeup or VFX, the more holistic knowledge you have of everything, it's just going to benefit you later on in life. And like I said, being open to opportunity, like if you want to get into sound design, that's great, but something pops up in a picture department, that might be an incredible opportunity, which may lead you to sound design. So you never know. I definitely was like this when I was young, and I think a lot of people are, that you think it's a straight line of where you're going to get, you're here and you want to get to there, and it's going to be an exact straight line, and that's not true. It's going to be a lot of bumps and winds and U-turns and things. And the thing that you think is not going to lead you to where you ultimately want to go could be the perfect route to get there. So just don't say no right off the bat when opportunity knocks.
Do you have any upcoming projects that you are at liberty to talk about?
Well, currently I am in the midst of What If Season 3, the Marvel animation series, which is much like Marvel Twilight Zone. And I was involved with Season 1 and Season 2. I've worked on almost every episode, and a really incredible director and picture editors, and it's a very challenging show, but it's a lot of fun. And I hear this is the final season, which makes me a little bit sad, but I'm glad I got to go on this journey with that team, and fans really seem to like it. So it's a fun project to be a part of.
Who knows? Maybe next we'll get a Star Wars What If. I know a lot of people are waiting on that.
That would be cool. And in some ways, I feel like Star Wars Visions is kind of like that in a different way.
Yeah.
And then the thing I really like about Visions is that they're really not, don't need to have any established characters or any established locations or anything. They've really let these filmmakers go off in completely new directions, which is really refreshing and really great.
I like it. You get to see all of these different what inspiration someone else might see in it, because what someone else sees might not be what you see, and vice versa.
I will take anything from Studio Trigger any day.
Triggerfish?
Yeah, whatever they're called now.
Yeah, Triggerfish in South Africa. Yeah, they were a lot of fun to work with. They're the one that did Owl's Song. They those two filmmakers were really a lot of fun to work with. Daniel and Nadia, and I actually got to meet them in person about 9 months later when I went to Ireland for the Kilkenny Animation Festival. We had a Star Wars Visions panel, and they flew in from South Africa, and they were just a joy. It was interesting when we worked on Our Song. They were very particular about how they wanted it to sound, and not necessarily, sound Star Wars like. Of course, they, were counting on us to sort of keep it within the Star Wars galaxy sonically, but they wanted to incorporate a lot of vocals into the sound design, which was interesting and challenging. So next time you watch it and listen to it, sort of keep your ear out for vocal-like elements in some of the sound design.
I have noticed sound can tell a story just as well as visuals can.
Absolutely. It's definitely I feel like it's a secret weapon that that we can do a lot. We can get away with a lot of things that the public, doesn't realize, that we're sort of manipulating their emotions through sound, where they're very savvy audiences about, like, music. They hear sad violins come in and they're like, oh, something's going to happen. It's going to make me cry. Or we can do similar things with sound. Just think about in a, whether it's live action or animation, if there's a scene, in a suburban neighborhood, if you hear songbirds, it gives you one kind of feeling, but we could take those songbirds out and put crows in there instead, and suddenly it's a very different mood. And we can, definitely sort of lead the audience, kind of sneak in, through the back of the brain, and give audiences these feelings, and they're like, I feel uncomfortable, but maybe they don't know why they're feeling uncomfortable.
I would hope that everyone who's watching this, I would hope that the next time you go into a movie or a show, that you're going to look at it just that little bit differently and try and find those little subtle variations. So where can people find you, Mac?
They can find me on Twitter, or X. I don't call it X. I don't think many people do. My handle on there is Gigantic Cranium, and that's probably where I spend more time social media wise compared to any other platform. I found a really great group of people on there that I connected with, and I like that platform for various reasons. And one of the reasons I like it so much is the power to mute words. I've muted so many words on there that it makes my feed just like so much better, because I'm really only paying attention to movies and audio and creative, parts of filmmaking. It's funny, like, even muting the word worst has been great. Like, I don't need to know the worst of something. Like, just I don't need to know your worst restaurant experience or your worst airline experience or things like that. It's like, no, it's just keep it a little more positive.
Well, that's actually kind of where the inspiration for this podcast came from. So the one I did when I was with Wikipedia, it was very focused, again, on the positives, on talking about what people love, what was their journey. Life's too short to be focused on the negatives. This thing sucked. I hate this. No, I want to know what people love. I love
Yep.
hearing about your journey. I love hearing about the passion. Like, you can hear the passion in your voice behind these projects. That's the things that I want to share with people. You know what? I want people to enjoy this, not just be negative. Where's the fun in that?
Yeah, and there's so many things to get excited about, um, and things to learn about, and connect with people. And yeah, I totally agree.
Something I've always said is that, even if a show comes out and it's not your favorite, there's still some inspiration you can find in it. And even if maybe you don't, someone else will. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
All right, Mac, do you have any final thoughts or parting words of wisdom for our fans?
One of my things that I like to sort of get on my soapbox and preach about is thinking about the power of sound, and how it can really do a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to storytelling. But unfortunately, a lot of filmmakers don't really think about it until it's too late. And so I'm always sort of preaching, get sound involved early. Think about how we can be, collaborative in the storytelling. We're not just window dressing at the very end of the project. And it's hard to communicate to, producers and the people holding the purse strings about that. But but I feel like we're slowly making our case about it, and certain filmmakers embrace it. Randy Tom has been very successful, who was my mentor back on Castaway and many projects after. He's gotten involved early with projects like How to Train Your Dragon and Ultraman Rising and the new Wild Robot movie that's just coming out. He did all the sounds of Emmy, the baby kaiju. He did it very early, so then the animators could actually animate to his sounds, which almost never happens. Don't be afraid of sound and what we can bring to the project, and that's what I like to say.
I love it. I love it. Well, Mac, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a genuine pleasure to have you here, and we would love to have you back anytime.
Yes, thank you very much.
Wonderful to meet you both. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.